All right.
Good
Professor,
morning, Prof. How are you, sir?
Good morning. Morning.
hope all is well.
Well, not yet. Like
Not yet.
everybody else, we're waiting to see what will happen in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
We have a long way to go before that near future, and a lot to discuss,
Mm-hmm.
Prof, of course, we want to talk a couple of things with you this morning, particularly regarding the disturbing crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, well, I am willing to answer the questions. Um,
You have a little volume, a delay volume issue there. You have an extra device on there?
yes, try to get the volume
Okay.
right.
Right.
Uh,
Last week, the Ministry of National Security held a press conference, which was attended to by Minister Hines, Minister Scotland, the Chief of Defense Staff, and the Commissioner of Police, and some of her team. At which time the DCP Benjamin indicated that the police service is in charge and in control of crime, much to the chagrin of many citizens. Do you think the police service is in charge of crime and control?
if I am to judge by the voices of the people, and even some of my colleagues from the university, and people like yourself on these talk shows, overall, I think the answer will be no. And I think the authorities, those names that you listed, the first step they should take is to have a frank and plain admission that crime has gotten out of control because you have these murder rates rising, you have extortion escalating with serious economic and social implications, and you have the home invasions unstoppable. If you take these three criteria alone, what you have is a society scared and apparently helpless. And if you have these officials coming on on the press conferences, they should seek to inspire people by first making an admission and also create the pathway for remedies. We seem to forget, for example, that the police commissioner, after years of debate and complaints by different commissioners, that you have authority but no power, meaning that they need power. And the Constitution gave them that. The Commission is responsible now for the entire police service, managing resources, promotion, transfers. So the question would arise as one example, to what extent is the police commissioner fulfilling that mandate? If not, what are the consequences? And how should those consequences be properly, fairly applied? But we're not hearing those issues. We keep going around on a merry-go-round. And I say so very respectfully and regretfully. The media is now on the merry-go-round. Every time there's a press conference, you get the big headlines, the superficial statements being said. Sorry. And every time there's a press conference, the media hops on until the next cycle arises. I say so very respectfully because if you say, for example, the Prime Minister is angry and shocked, that is a big front page. What happens after that? Every commentator coming afterwards is coming after the fete is over with a little spot in the fourth page or fifth page.
The Commissioner of Police responded.
That's on and on.
The Commissioner responded to a question.
The question I have to raise now is that what is the role of the media in the issue of crime in relation to the authorities and the public response? I'm sorry to cut you off, Paul, but I
No,
wanted.
no, it's a valid question. Just early this week, I indicated to Steve that we wanted to get senior media practitioners on to talk about if they think the media is operating adequately in those at those press conferences, because questions have been raised about if they are effective in holding the authorities to account in the press conferences, or just asking really superficial questions when answers are given. I want to go back to the statements you made in response to the first question, where the commissioner responded to a question from a journalist to ask if she agreed with her DCP that the police were in control. And the commissioner's response, and I'm paraphrasing here, was that, well, the police are judged by the main metrics of murders. And murders are understandably a significant metric because people are losing their lives in large amounts. I think
Yes.
somebody said yesterday in Senate, every 3 days, two people, or every 2 days, three people lose their lives in this country based on the current trends. And she said murders were the main metrics, but no, people are now scared of home invasions. My understanding is I heard from 4 different people yesterday in different constituencies that even roadside vegetable retailers are now the victims of extortion attempts. And I think the police have put a new system in place. What do you think is the main gap in, and I'll come back to the media issue in a while, in the effectiveness of the police service presently?
You know, as I spoke about the merry-go-round, I too are caught up in the merry-go-round. Without elaborating, because there's a personal aspect to this, Paul. You know, we have done the manpower audit. And the question you're asking, we have answered that in 600 pages. But coming back to your precise concern, what the commissioner is saying is missing the point. And what the journalists who were there at the press conference should have asked repeatedly is, well, the numbers of murder is one aspect. That's not the main metric is what is your detection rate? If you have your detection rate high, relatively high, 60%, 70%, you will find out a couple of important things for strategizing onwards. That is, you will know where these murderers are coming from, alleged murderers. You will know their profile, how rich or poor they are, whether they were employed, what is the educational level. And when you ask those precise policy oriented questions, you could then intervene. And perhaps because the people who are committing murders are not being detected, they become recidivists. They keep on doing the same thing. So the journalists now should press on the question of detection rate. And whilst the media will publish the rate 430, 440 murders and compare it to last year for the same period, they also have to put alongside that the detection rate, because that is where the police intervention actually comes in. Because they will tell you, the police that is, and rightfully so, they cannot stop all murders, domestic murders, for example, crimes of passion, and so on, but they can deal with the detection rate. So, what the commissioner, particularly the commissioner, has to come up front and tell the public what is it that she is missing so much that the detection rate, especially in murder, and the similar thing is happening to other crimes. What is she missing in technology, manpower, government policy, vehicles, and so on? But we're not hearing that, frankly. What we're seeing, and I'm a little amused, I'm not particularly angry because this has been going on for years, Paul. You would know. You're in the middle of the issue all the time. This press conference and picture taking and so on and getting the front page, and after that, everything dies down until the next cycle. We have to stop that culture of distraction. We have to get serious and realize this country is going down the drain. And it is fueled by three major frightening episodes. One is the murder rate. And the randomness of the murder is frightening. It isn't that they're going in one district or one area. It's happening from Belmont to Cedras, San Grande. There's nothing like urban crime or rural crime anymore. It's a national crisis. Then you have this extortion. Businesses are deciding to close up now. And that is bad for public service, especially with getting fuel and other essentials you need. And then you have the home invasions. People sleeping, pensioners sleeping, and they're getting murdered. They're getting killed and robbed. So we're in a serious crossroads. And the authorities need to recognize that. And whilst there's a road for public relations, there has to be a pathway for policy making, implementation with benchmarks and accountability. It looks as if nobody is accountable at the top. And that is where the Police Service Commission also comes in.
I'm glad you mentioned that. You brought that into the conversation, because I was going to ask you that as the next question. You are saying hold the media to account to operate at a higher level. But the present Commissioner of Police has been given another year extension. The government has said that based on the assessment of the Police Service Commission, and that's their job to assess the Commissioner and her DCPs and their performance, the report out of that was satisfactory enough that the government decided to give Mrs. Harewood Christopher another term. I have not seen a published report of the assessment. You were once chair of the Police Service Commission. Is there anything prohibiting the Police Service Commission from making that assessment public? And should it be made public in terms of bolstering the credibility of the present commissioner?
The way these commissions, these oversight bodies operate all over the world is with full transparency, because they recognize the obligations that they have to the public. Nothing stops the Police Service Commission from doing what you were suggesting. They should have a press conference and answer questions from the public, especially in terms of what are the criteria used to reappoint the police commissioner. They might be very useful. She might be successful in managing the police service, in having crime reduction, and other criteria that the Police Service Commission now uses. What we need is a report. What we need from the Police Service Commission now, and given the context in which we are now, is a press conference to explain. You cannot be shrouded in secrecy in such a serious matter when the public are left wondering, the taxpayers are left wondering, well, what is happening? We're not hearing anything serious about accountability. We're hearing a number of excuses, some of them genuine. I sympathize, I empathize with the police service. I have known them for a very long time. I know when Snaggs was there, when Guy was there, when Roach was there. I worked very closely with them. We did monumental amount of community policing programs. But what was lacking was sustainability. And that's another issue. So the Police Service Commission now should help guide the public into coming to proper and fair conclusions. And there's nothing stopping them from doing that. They cannot be continued shrouded in secrecy. I say so with respect, but at the same time, the chairman and the members must realize they have a public duty as well. And that should come up very early. And now we will have a better idea of what the police commissioner is saying or not saying. And this idea about, there's too much distraction. The recent one now is 80-year-olds committing crimes. What kind of crimes, we don't know. You're talking about extortion. 80-year-olds. Have they held anyone to establish some evidence that it is true? But you get a big headline, and that means nothing, because there is no evidence to suggest.
Well, I found it was a curious statement that the DCP made without adding any context at all, and saying people as young as the teenagers are involved in crime. Well, we knew that for a while. But now people as young as 8-year-olds are involved in crime. But the DCP didn't give us any context as to what type of crime. I think the implication was it was extortion. We didn't know under what circumstances. If it was somebody in a primary school telling another person, if you don't give me $100 tomorrow, I'll go bring my father for you. So you don't get a sense of, and if it is more than one minor in that age demographic. So you don't get a lot of data information at all upon which to see if this is a prevalent or a one-off issue. So it was just, and of course, when you put that out there, it's going to be the headline, unfortunately, without the journalist probing more about that particular statement by the police official.
Well, what happens after that, Paul? You're correct. Pardon me for making reference to you, but you are in the middle of this thing. You have done research, children, and all the other implications from being neglected. But when he made that announcement, that's another bombshell. It's like the Prime Minister saying he's angry and shocked. Big headlines, nothing after after that. Then you have another one, there are guns found in Santa Cruz. A large number of guns.
How disturbed are you by the revelation that from the Coast Guard now, Major Daniel, that so many of the naval assets are being repaired on maintenance schedule, and of course that revelation meant that the borders are not being patrolled as effectively as one would expect or hope, given the number of vessels that are now being repaired, and in the context that, well, the illegal guns coming into the country through porous borders and drugs is one of the main reasons that we find ourselves in this country in this position.
Well, Paul, you're adding another element to our security. If your borders are so uncontrolled, non-guarded, what do you expect? How could you come inside now and complain about guns fueling gangs, fueling crime, when your borders, the place where the guns are coming in illegally, the drugs are coming in illegally, if they are not properly covered, you are responsible. And that's why I keep saying you don't want to be unfair, but you want to be fair and transparent. Who is accountable today for the situation in which we find ourselves? And we have to prevent ourselves being distracted time and time again. And the media has a role to play. I'm thinking about this in a more serious way. How could the media has to publish what is said. There's an obligation. But the question is, how is it published and what happens afterwards? So these more substantive issues. When you highlight these superficial issues and distractions, and you ask somebody like me or from UE to come in, it is not an equivalent input. The Fed has been over.
So let me ask you a direct question. Do you think the media is being manipulated?
I think so, very subtly. And I think they have to revise their approach. They are manipulated, I would say, not necessarily maliciously, like bribing or what Satmaraj used to call back pocket journalism. But the whole issue of reporting, crime especially, has to be revisited, because you cannot allow the authorities to come and deliberately say something that will catch public appetite for sensationalism, which is like the state of emergency. I don't know where that comes from, but the press is after it as if it is something so it came
So
from.
you think, for example, that's another red herring designed to distract?
I think that is a distraction now, because the fundamental issue is the detection rate. In my view, you haven't done anything to improve the quality of policing. I'm not only talking about the figures, but the quality of policing, your manpower capabilities in terms of how are you trained. Do you get regular assessments? These things are not really qualitatively looked after.
Now, you're a criminologist.
There's an issue I want to leave before you.
No, we have 20 minutes, so we have some time.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Tren de Aragua?
Pardon me?
Have you heard of a gang called Tren?
Oh, yeah, they're all they're all names. Yes.
Right. Another revelation after the press conference is that Venezuelan gangs are now collaborating with and competing with local gangs. And from where you sit as a criminologist, are you seeing the type of typology of crime that would indicate that there is a strong presence of Venezuelan gangs in this country? I made, up to 5 years ago, I started making voicing concerns about when we started, before the devolution of the situation in Venezuela, where there were migrants coming here, illegal migrants coming here because of the unrest in Venezuela and instability, that not only law-abiding citizens were coming, gang members would possibly be coming too. And now we're hearing reports that Tren de Aragua, which is on the American watch list, which is one of the most dangerous gangs out of South America, Venezuela in particular, is now wreaking havoc in South Central America, North America, and potentially in the Caribbean. How concerned are you about that new addition to the equation?
It comes back to the border control again as one issue. Secondly, it is not surprising that the gangs, not only from Venezuela, from Colombia, the kind of murders we're witnessing here with decapitation and so on, those are new things, frightful in a sense in terms of the frequency. And the gangs, especially buttressed by input from Venezuela, Colombia, riding on drug trafficking, and Trinidad is very vulnerably placed, very vulnerable. It's placed just north of South America, easy transit point for drugs, human trafficking. So I come back and you raise the point about border control. I mean, it's so serious, it's almost a joke that you will have your borders, the southern border particularly, so on patrol and unmanned. And who is accountable for it? Did you hear anything about accountability? Every 6 months, the police service, the police commissioner, every 6 months, he or she is required to submit a report to the Police Service Commission about how things are going. We would want to know when last was such a report submitted, what are some of the important relevant contents, which will cover the issues you are raising. What about gangs? I'm very worried about gangs. Like many people, the gang culture is now so embedded in the community that the residents in various communities support the gangs. They feel the gangs are more friendly to them than the police officers.
But sometimes they're forced to because they're living in fear. And if you go against the dictates of the gang in your community, you pay sometimes a deadly price for it.
Exactly. So you have a culture now of gangsterism deeply rooted in the community, thriving on fear, protection, and receiving basketball courts and other amenities to keep the community friendly to the gang members. Where the gang members come from, apart from the Venezuelans and the Colombians, from the communities. So you have an issue of how do you deal with, how you prevent gang. I am afraid it is almost, the horse has already left the barn in a sense.
But there must be a way to intervene in this productively. I mean, we can't just say the horse lead the gun. There must be a way collectively to intervene and turn around this time.
Well, Paul, we have always been trying to be optimistic. When Hazel Manning was minister, we ran program in almost every secondary school because she felt, and wisely so, as Minister of Education, that a lot of the gangs formation membership come from the secondary schools.
Mm-hmm.
And we did an index. What are the high risk students that will end up into gangs? We look at missing schools, not doing homework, taking drugs, and we formed an index, and it's about 10 to 15% of the secondary school students fell into that category. And now we were moving into a prevention mode, linking the school output with the community support and the police support and so on. But then she was moved, and a new minister came and everything else. So I was saying earlier on, we lack sustainability. We keep spending money after programs, repeat the same programs a few years afterwards, and give a press release, and everything gets hunky-donkey. Once again, sustainability, accountability, and the process for discipline in the authorities. We have to enforce those things, and the certain people sit in the center of it: the Minister of National Security, the Chairman of the National Security Council, the Police Commissioner, and the Police Service Commission. These have constitutional authorities, except the National Security Council, which is the cabinet subcommittee. But these other people have constitutional powers, and they have the resources and the institutional capacity, presumably, to do the work. But we're not doing the work, and crime is falling all over our heads. The extortion thing that was getting very serious, very, very serious. It has.
Do you think academic institutions are doing the level of work they should be doing? I mean, I did some preliminary research going to the Ministry of Education's website and using the SCA and primary and secondary school attendance as a baseline for seeing where the issues, and identified 3 areas in the last couple of years that consistently underperform at SCA. These are 3 educational districts that consistently underperform. I think it's northwest, northeast, and one part of central Trinidad. You run a correlation between the levels of dropouts from these areas, people who don't complete secondary school, in some instances dropping out at primary school, and you're seeing some very strong correlations, which could be indicators to policy changes, putting more resources in those areas by using the data. Do you think the academic institutions are doing the kind of work and analysis with the data available to provide, as you said, a different kind of narrative and discussion, even in the media?
I think they should. I don't want to be too intrusive to make a judgment on whether they're doing it or not, but they should do that. The question will arise, as in my case, when you produce these reports to the government. I mean, Paul, you should be smiling now, because when you produce these reports to the government, the ministry.
But that's not really the point. The point is to do the work. The ministry uses it, but they cannot do the work. And you have the expertise to provide the comprehensive, credible analysis and say, well, they ain't using it, so we ain't doing it. That's not how academics operates. You know that.
Or you could carry the horse to water, and you know the rest. That's what's happening. So where I sit, it is serious, but I'm amused to see the same thing happening over and over. And when Deputy Commissioner Junior Benjamin make the statement, well, we have crime under control, the public should have no fear, we want to ask, well, in which country is he living? If he tells us, put it differently. So what they try to do is to appease the public concern, and I understand that. They don't want to frighten the public more. But at the same time, we have to be credible. If you don't have credibility, you will not be respected, and you will not be supported in the various communities, because you will come across as a politician more than a police professional. So if you're talking about separating politics from policing, this is a good example. You cannot go on as a police officer and appear as a politician. You have to be professional. You have to admit. You have to show what strategies you're using, what results you have obtained, and carry on. And the public will respect you. They will realize you need genuine help, because if you're telling me crime is under control, what you need my help for?
Well, I didn't understand the statement, because his commissioner, his boss, came before the Joint Select Committee, National Security, in the last 2 cycles, when she was first appointed, a couple of months after that, and identified some benchmarks, which most of them they didn't make. And more recently, a couple of months ago, came before, upon recently being reappointed for another year, and identified a different set of benchmarks, much more moderate benchmarks, and didn't make most of them. So based on that alone, I don't know how DCP Benjamin could have made that statement. Cherry picking 1 or 2 statistics and not looking at the overall picture and context was quite unproductive. And as you said, all it does is you saw memes floating around the internet disparaging what he said, because the population saying, you're not living in the same country that we're living in. So cherry picking 1 or 2 statistical points and positing that as we in control of crime, when the population clearly feels otherwise, and the Prime Minister making a statement, don't blame me, blame the criminals, is really living in a cloud.
Yes. We're living in virtual reality, sort of. You see,
I do think the young man who got killed in Malik shot at point blank range, I don't think his family living in virtual reality. His family has to deal with his murder. You understand?
Yes.
The public who the victims of crime and the effects of crime on the wider society, and the sense of oppression and fear that we feel, the population feels. That's not virtual reality. That's real. That's real life every day, every hour,
You
coming at
see,
you on social media.
they are victims of crime, but they are secondary victims. When a crime, a murder happens in a family, a home invasion happens, the whole family, man, woman, and child, is put up on grievance mode. If you listen to some of the remarks made by relatives of people who are murdered, the question is asked, and I have a note of some of them. What kind of country are we living in? What kind of place has this come to? When will it end? Who is going to help us? Those are the cries of the public. And that's why at the beginning of the show, I refer to the voices of the people. These voices are ones of grievance, not only concern. The public, from these issues, when these crimes happen in their homes or in the streets, there are a lot of grievances, and you have the public now feeling helpless. So when the police and the related agencies have their press conference, they should attend to this. Don't behave like a politician. Mr. Hines could do that. But the interesting thing, when you have Mr. Hines, National Security Minister, sitting next to the police commissioner and the deputies, they have to be careful about what they say. I'm not saying that the National Security Minister doesn't have a role, but he must be careful about what his role is really about.
Do you think the addition of the additional Minister Scotland, now in charge of the TTPS, immigration, and I think one other portfolio under national security, will or can make a difference?
Well, so far, I think it might be too early, but the number of pictures I think Mr. Scotland got on visiting Tobago and meeting the business people, and he should give a little commitment about, well, in the next 6 months, give him a specific rule over the police service. These might be the results. So we need to hear something more tangible from Mr. Scotland. Now, the outstanding question is, and this is not nitpicking, but if you put a minister over the police service, you have to be careful it doesn't cross the role of the commissioner over the police. You have to
Well, I
be
was going to ask the question: What is a minister's role? Is policy,
policy, yes.
resources and oversight at some level, because they now are part of the National Security Council and they sit weekly and they look. I guess there's a direct conduit now as to whether or not they have resources they need. They can give feedback to the National Security Council. National security is a wide portfolio, so now there are two ministers. What should the minister's role be in this case?
The minister should have a serious discussion with the commissioner to find out, first of all, why is the detection rate so low? What can the government, by policy and resources, do to help you improve the detection rate? That's the first thing he should be doing.
He didn't need to be a minister for that. He was chair of the National Security Joint Select Committee, and he asked that question. This committee asked that question over and over. You'd have to be a minister to do that.
Well, you see, he cannot be in the operational zone with the police service, telling them what to do and how to do it and so on. So I think I agree with you. He is supposed to make policies that will help the police commissioner and the police service. That is what he has to do. Find out what they need, how policy can help. And so far, if he wants to venture out, he could say, well, we are giving them so many resources. The Prime Minister has repeatedly said how much resources they have given to the police service. You have hundreds of police vehicles parked up in Komoto quickly under disrepair. You keep on buying police vehicles without maintenance, proper maintenance, and those are policy issues. The supply of resources, because the Constitution says the commissioner can only use the resources that are available to her. That issue came up when Gibbs and Iwaski were here, and I was chairman of the Police Service Commission. He wanted to buy an aeroplane and so on, and there was something about process. And that issue came up that the government is responsible for supplying resources, and the commission is responsible for managing those resources effectively. So we come back to square one. We can go all around the place, Paul, but we have to come back to accountability and management. And that is where these press conferences held by the police authorities should focus on. And rather than speaking about 8-year-olds now and trying to sensationalize issues unnecessarily, we should attend to the question of accountability, sustainability, and matters like that for the public interest.
Do you think the present construct and expertise of the TTPS has what it takes to
The present construct?
to manage to reduce the crime level
Well,
in the key indices?
we come back, we come back to the fundamentals, Sometimes the police service, for example, and the leadership, it looks as there's a sick person that refuses to take the medicine. They need the help, but they refuse to do what is in their interest. And with great reluctance, I refer to the police inspectorate. The question you're asking supposed to be the role of a police inspectorate unit, gather all the information from each police station, what is deficient, what is the relationship between the citizen and the police, what the police need in Toko is different from Port of Spain, and all those essentials at the ground level will then be collected, assessed, and given a proper manner to the executive of the police commissioner's office. So the gaps will remain because we don't have any remedy, any strategy to collect the data at the bottom line. Whatever we, and anybody else might be doing, the police themselves should collect proper data to help them manage the police service. You cannot manage the police service at the top without having the proper data coming from the ground level. You can't only have press conference at the top and talk about things. Leadership in the police service has to be directly at gathering information and then working on it. What they fancifully call evidence-based management. Are we seeing enough of that in the police service? And if Commissioner Ola Christopher having problems with resources, she should tell the government that and get the remedies in place. I have a suspicion she's shortage of remedies in that respect, but she should be robust enough to tell the police, national security minister, and the government what she needs.
Well, if it's funding, to my knowledge, in the last three political cycles, national security and education have gotten the largest part of the pie, with the exception of COVID when health moved up for obvious reasons. So one wonders if funding is the issue, or use of the funding, effective use of the funding, because like $8 billion, if I'm not mistaken, thereabouts. And I think it may have gone down to 7 when they try to reduce the budget. But they usually get the largest share of the budget. Whether or not it's being used effectively is a question, I guess, we will all have to answer. Professor, thanks for being with us this morning. Any closing comments?
Well, Paul, what I will tell you, I feel myself in a very uncomfortable position.
Likewise.
Having to commend on policing, but I have done this so many times. I have to ask myself on the question about the media. How long are we going along with this same routine? Interviews, discussions, and nobody's hearing, nobody's listening. So I would suggest that the media has to revisit its role and develop some strategies to enforce accountability rather than just reporting on press conferences.
And grabbing sensational headlines. Professor, thanks for being with us this morning.
Yeah.